This is the easiest thing that we could have ever done and no one's doing it. And that got us into 525 accounts without a distributor. This is the first impression. Someone's opening a box and it's exploded everywhere. And thinking about it now, I'm like, why did I ever do that?
Welcome to Founders Friday and welcome to Lily Geiger of Figlia.
Yes.
And for those of you in the crowd, Figlia, not Figlia, as I might have pronounced it. And that's where I want to start.
Everyone does. It's fine. It's totally fine.
What's the origin of the name before? I mean, does that get into the origin of the entire company? Because if so, we'll wait.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll wait. So now let's dive into the product in particular. Describe the product for us. What is it? Or the set of products that you eventually plan to build too. The brand. Tell us the story.
So Figlia, just as a product, is a non-alcoholic aperitivo. So it's similar to a Campari or Aperol, but it doesn't have any alcohol, no added sugars, no preservatives. Launched in 2021. Idea started in 2020. So still kind of at the tail end of COVID when we launched. So we were initially D2C online just for that first month. And then we're also in a lot of stores. We're in 525 accounts nationwide. That includes restaurants, bars, stores. And we have 2 SKUs. So we have our bottle, which is a concentrate. So that's the aperitivo. And then we also have a can. So it's a spritz, basically the perfect ratio of what's in our bottle, sparkling water and lemon. And that's all. We only have 1 flavor and 2 SKUs. We are working on other flavors, but we've lasted 3 years just having this 1 flavor and it's been successful. And I started the company having lost my dad to addiction. My father was an alcoholic growing up, and I lost him to the disease when I was 20, and put a lot into perspective of just the options that were not available for those who don't drink, especially those in recovery. If you go to a bar and the only option is a non-alcoholic beer, it still tastes like beer, and so can be super triggering. And so I wanted to come up with something that definitely tasted sophisticated and didn't compromise on flavor and taste, but still did not trigger the taste of alcohol. So we're not like an alcohol analog, like a non-alcoholic gin or non-alcoholic whiskey. So
it's really interesting. Thanks for sharing, first of all. The person who introduced us, Elizabeth, at Absence of Proof, when we were chatting a few weeks ago at Founders Friday, it was really interesting to get into the different audiences served. It's like people who do drink. Then I think, you might know these terms better than I. She had 3 categories. Then it was
sober curious.
Curious, thank you. Yeah. And then sober, right? And then I think there was the subcategory of sober for, let's call it, superficial, not in a bad way, but surface level reasons, and then sober, perhaps attempting to do that for a health or personal purpose. If you wouldn't mind, let's dive in a little bit to that founding story. When you think about that origin for you, providing meaning and purpose, how did that then fuel your thinking? Were you inspired to say, I want to serve individuals? It sounds like you've made, I like this term of it's a non-triggering version, or, it's not like a non-alcoholic whiskey. Mm-hmm. Was that intentional? Was it exploratory as to, okay, that inspired you and you said, I want to build something in this space? Go back to that moment, if you can, of what does that inspiration turn into?
Yeah, so I had the idea to start this during COVID. I obviously had my own backstory of my experience with growing up with an alcoholic parent, but I also was just seeing how much everyone was drinking. And so I just kind of stopped drinking as much as I at least was before. I'm not completely sober, but I really don't drink ever. If anything, I'll have a glass of wine sometimes, but that's really just for taste. And, if there's a good non-alcoholic red wine out there, I'm always trying to experiment and try it, but nothing I think is really nailed it yet. But anyways, back to what you were asking, I certainly, was ordering just a ton of products online. And I found that I didn't want anything that actually tasted like alcohol every single night. I just wanted something that tasted sophisticated. And I had in mind, someone who was in recovery and what their experience might be having a product like this. And so that was top of mind. So I always say we're first and foremost for the sober community, those in recovery, because our hearts go out to them. But we found that in the process, about 80% of our customer base just doesn't identify as sober. They just don't want to drink as much. They're just trying to drink less.
Which is really interesting because I think it's there's this youth generation trend that's happening of being sober, from an optional perspective. Then to your point, a lot more, I think, receptiveness and support for the community who's, kind of transitioning into becoming non-alcoholic. When you're building that brand and you're thinking about the movement of what you're entering into, how much of that do you have to stick to as part of, this origin story? And I ask that because I think there's this thing when you're a mission-driven founder, you're definitely passionate about that effect. But then there's the community that now has expectations of you.
Yeah.
Then there's a taking advantage in a positive way, but there's using that community to say, okay, come try my product I'm building for you, and taking, again, good advantage of that. What are the hidden implications? What's the story at that point in terms of you deciding to tie yourself either 10, 50 or 90% to a movement or a generational change.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially with our story, we're kind of the only brand that's out here talking about addiction, honestly. And so I think that, we're a lot of, I would say, other brands like to say, okay, like mix it with alcohol, just mix one in. Like, you can have a mocktail in between drinks and that's totally fine. We don't really take that approach. I'm not going to tell people how to drink. If they want to mix it with alcohol, it's totally fine. I'm not going to harsh them for that. But yeah, I think when you're taking a stance like that, it might limit, the amount of people that maybe gravitate towards your brand. But I still think there's so many people in this country, in this world that actually can relate to the story that we've created such a large community around our product and our brand. But yeah, I would say there's so many different brands that have come out since that have this movement has, gotten a lot more momentum and has gotten a lot larger since I came into it. I'm 3, almost 4 years old. So it's different now. I mean, I think that now it's this buzzy, popular space to be in. And like you're saying, Gen Z is now less interested in drinking. I have a cousin who's in college and he's like, yeah, I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean they're sober. They're doing other things, but they don't really care about alcohol as much. Right. So it is interesting. I could see.
Inside of that, one specific question. So, and we'll get into kind of the very specifics of the drink and how to sell it, but very specifically at first, does that mean when you go to restaurants, you try not to get them to mix it with alcohol as part of the story?
Because I don't dictate the way they serve it. So actually there's one Thai restaurant in the city near here that has it in a cocktail and it's flies off the shelf. And he's one of our top orderers. It's a top PO for us. I'm not going to tell him to not serve it that way because it's up to him. And I like that it's still there because if someone does want a mocktail, they can always spritz that with sparkling water and give it to someone and it still would be a good option for them. So I always just let them kind of do their thing. But I would say for the most part, we are always on the, zero proof list, that side of the menu. And what's exciting is that side's actually now, on the menu. So we are getting, a lot of people. I went to San Ambrose here in the city. It was a new account of ours and sat down and tried the first drink that they had made with our product. And as I was there, he was mixing 10 more of them. And you could just tell people are ordering these drinks, especially around, dry January or sober October. It's something that I think might spark that interest for people. They might try it out for a month and see oh, I feel so much better. And so you see that, trickling into other months and it's definitely popular now.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's super interesting. The feeling of getting to be part of that shift must be super special because, again, kind of thinking about this thematically, that portion of the menu was not only not there often, you just had the alcoholic beverages and then maybe, coffees, but then also restaurateurs had to get used to the idea of making money off of it, which is now, kind of a thing. Totally. And to your point about kind of the mixing in that might happen, the general thing that I think is being encouraged is there's a craft here about drinks that isn't necessarily about alcoholic drinks. So let's dive into that a little bit. But before we do, tell us about the name, the origin, from that perspective.
Yeah, so Figlia means daughter in Italian.
Oh.
I would say, aperitif culture, aperitivo, very centered around Italy. And so I wanted to respect that with just the type of product I was launching, but I also wanted to honor why I'm doing it, which is really for my dad and my experience with him. And so, that's
awesome. Well, so let's dive into it from a logistical perspective. First of all, what does it taste like?
So our first flavor, Fiore, means flower in Italian. And the leading flavors are rose, bitter, orange, and clove.
And from the perspective of having one SKU so far, is that a matter?
2 SKUs, one flavor.
2 SKUs, one flavor. Is that a matter of, kind of an origin of being a few years in and wanting to focus, or is there something more particular there?
I just think there are so many brands that just shoot out so many different flavors, and I don't know if they actually land, and I feel like it's so expensive. And this is still a new category. There's still so much education that goes into it. So for us, I really wanted to get to know that first flavor first, see how people responded to it, and also see what people didn't like about it. And then, take all that information and put that into what we are now formulating in our next flavor. And I'm really glad I took the time to get that feedback and to also just see how far we could even take this first flavor. And it's been great. So.
Let's talk about that first flavor moment. So it's COVID era, and you haven't been in beverage. What does it literally look like to try to develop a flavor and develop that first product and paint as much of a visual too? I'd love to feel a little bit of what that development of a first product looks like.
Very makeshift, a lot of Googling, a lot of YouTubing. I mean, you can think about, the fun stuff like formulating your product and what the bottle will look like and what agency to work with for the branding. But it's like, how do I even have I need to get an LLC. I need to get certain types of insurance. I need to at least from like a, admin standpoint, there's so much work that goes into even just being able to work with all those people and forming a legitimate company.
Is that true even of like initially developing it's interesting you say that, like I'm realizing even to develop a flavor, you might need to work with so many other companies that the LLC comes first. Is that accurate?
Just to at least maybe have a bank account to be like putting money into that type of thing. You just kind of want
to... Because you can't do it from
I would
scratch.
like to just, personally, like I'm a little OCD. I wanted to make sure I had my ducks in a row. I was organized and I had a bank account that had an LLC behind it.
Totally. But did you go buy ingredients off the shelf first? Did you
No.
get to do anything before you had your LLC?
So I had tried a ton of products on the market.
Yeah.
I had also experimented in my own kitchen. Like I was living at home with my mom. Like we both didn't really want to drink. And so we were trying a bunch of different things. Nothing really stuck with me. Like nothing I was like, wow, this is really great. I want, I'm taking serious inspiration from these brands. Because a lot of them had like either tons of sugar, had preservatives in them, or like were adaptogenic, and I didn't want any of that. Or like I said, were like analogs of booze. So I just didn't really want that. And so yeah, I was kind of starting from scratch, I guess, and just had a few ideas, but worked with the formulator out in Los Angeles and our recipe developer, and they kind of helped us form this.
So that's really
first
interesting.
Flavor.
So that first flavor, so you set the LLC, you begin to kind of formalize and have your ducks in a row. So that means you're kind of, even before you have your flavor, you're a little bit going, I'm going to definitely be doing something with this business before you necessarily zeroed in on flavor. Then you have to find a formulator. What is the process of finding a formulator?
If you don't know anything like me, it's, Googling
and just calling.
I didn't know anyone else in the beverage space. Like I wasn't even in an office. I was like so alone, and I also didn't have I still really don't have any like mentors in this space. I've talked to a ton of people who really know what they're doing, and I've met them and we've talked, but I don't have anyone I'm like calling like, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah.
So I think that was from the jump. The hardest part is I'm just going to Google it and see how far I can go with this and see who I can find. I spoke to a bunch of different people on the phone. A lot of it is like, you want to make sure they're like legit. You want to make sure they're not too expensive or they're not trying to like scam you. Also, it's COVID. So like even I wasn't going in for these tastings and meeting them. I was like Zooming with them, and then they would send me the product, and then we would have calls, and then we'd go over the notes.
You weren't going, tell me how good this is.
Yeah, exactly. So it was like so discombobulated. It was so just kind of crazy, but I'm really grateful that at least it's like, I always say it's like business school, but totally reconstructed, and you kind of just have to go out on your own and figure it out.
So you're cold emailing, calling these, first what was the name of the?
Recipe developers. Co-packers.
And then, co-packers. So there's like an ecosystem that you have to like kind of form around you to develop the first product. How many of them who were there in the beginning are still the people you use today?
They are no longer with us.
None of them?
No.
Wow. So everyone who
from
developed...
recipe, co-packer, they are no longer with us. We have IP on the recipe, obviously. We've taken it to another co-packer. That co-packer ended up being a recipe developer / co-packer / just like everything. And we were basically co-packing out of Los Angeles. We had a warehouse in New Jersey. Like, that doesn't make sense logistically. Like, that is so stupid. Thinking about it now, like, I'm like, why did I ever do that? Like, you're an idiot.
Is it a good way to do the first one, or is it also just like... Even for the first, like I guess, like, is there
we had
phase
2
one?
production runs with them, I would say, and it ended up just totally not being good for us. No, bad on them, but like it just was not like you shouldn't never have freight going from Los Angeles to Jersey to then be shipping back to, like, it's just
back to Los Angeles.
What the hell was I thinking? But again, like, no one could, like, it was also a matter of like launch as fast as you can to get it out there. So like I didn't really have time to like talk to everyone, get the best price. I also had not done this before. So I'm like learning as I go. And I'm kind of just like rushing into a launch. And I'm glad we did, because I hit the market at the right time.
Totally.
And I also believe in like launch as fast as you can and learn as you go and just get it out there. And you can, right all your wrongs in the process. And we did quickly. So like we ended up moving to a co-packer in Utah, which is a little bit more central, but still closer to the West Coast. We warehouse like minutes away from where we co-pack, and we source a lot of our packaging and everything on that same campus. So a lot of those costs are streamlined. There's not a lot of freight that goes into it. And our only distributor currently is on the East Coast, because if we're drop shipping wholesale, which we can do for a lot of accounts because we don't have alcohol, we're a lot closer to the West Coast. So the distributor is less, I guess, necessary on the West Coast for right now.
Oh, interesting.
Because restaurants and bars end accounts want distributors because they're going to get it in a second.
Right.
If we say, hey, we're going to drop ship to you, it gets there in like 5-7 days, they're like, I don't want to wait that long. So by having at least, obviously, we need freight to New York. By having at least the East Coast covered, by having a warehouse here, that's a lot easier for us. Obviously, we're trying to get as much distribution set up. But in the process, because you don't want to rush those contracts, you kind of have to figure out strategically, okay, like how can I make this work for now until we get the right distributors, the right partners, and then we can kind of plug and play in those regions that we know we're doing well in. And
if you're building a beverage brand, do you spend 80% of your time on things like distribution, logistics? Do you spend 80% of your time thinking about using brand for the same purposes, but brand and creative and marketing? Like from a, if people in the crowd are interested in this space as a potential future founder, where will they actually spend their day-to-day? What will be their individual contribution as a founder? Because I think, talking to different people in this food and beverage space in their early days, it's very different depending on the product and the brand in particular.
Totally. I mean, I would say all founders are different. I think there's also different stages of being a founder. So when I first started, it was just like making sure we made the right first impression, making sure that, people were trying the product, making sure we could at least, because we don't have alcohol in our product, we could self-distribute, just getting into as many stores, restaurants, bars as possible. And a lot of that boots on the ground work is done by me because I'm the only one in New York. My team is all remote, so no one else is here with me. And then I think, just from a brand standpoint, like social media, brand community, marketing events, really getting people in person because we started during COVID. So that was like the first step for us, was just making sure that people could try it in person before buying it online and getting into those few initial accounts. And then now, 3 years in, my role as a founder, a lot of it is, let's work with the right distributor. Let's make sure that contract, is something that we've fully thought through, because if you're in the wrong contract, it's like a marriage. And then if someone acquires you later and they look at that contract, that might not, or wants to acquire you and looks at that and they're like, I can't get into that. And so, I would say a lot of what I'm doing now is working on the right distribution, the right just path to, larger retail, and how we do that, and just not go over our skis and just like, let's just sign up to get into every Whole Foods account in the US when we don't have enough product yet. We don't have, as many SKUs as we probably should to have enough shelf space for that yet. And so that's really it.
Was there an opportunity to have somebody do like a first prototype? There are like these startups, I feel like, that come up every once in a while that are like, we'll help you launch your fashion brand. We're made to incubate a new brand. Is there something like that in the beverage space?
That was kind of like what we had worked with, I would say, to start.
Is that a good idea? Generally, maybe not executed well by these individuals, but like if you had to think from a should the ecosystem have this perspective?
If you have a connection to someone who's done this before, I would probably, if they can vouch for people, go with
they can almost set up a little run for you.
Correct. And also if you have someone you can really trust to ask those questions and, avoid those hurdles that I just had to kind of face head on, I would say that's the better, just to save money also and work with the right people and not have to, if you can avoid that, it's
honestly
great.
Though, the founder scar tissue, because I love, as you talked about, just addressing it head on, I go I've had fun doing that. I feel like some of that is a good scar tissue to build at the end of the day.
And I think what was great about at least working with them is they really helped us understand what it meant to, you need, UPC, you need barcode, you need, if you're going to use this product and you don't want preservatives, this means you're going to have to do a hot fill process, which means that this is going to be your shelf life, which means you should probably make sure that you look into XYZ. And, there's just so much that goes into, especially, like I said, an ingestible product. You have to make sure your co-packing facility is FDA approved and that you're sourcing the right ingredients. And often because they're working with so many brands, they probably know a ton of vendors, but recipe developers know a ton of vendors too. So one thing that we've done is we formulated with them, but we've completely done another reformulation already with our new recipe developer, just from a COGS standpoint. We want to get our costs down. Can we have it taste the same, but just use cheaper products? Or when you're ordering, usually with a product like this, there's a ton of ingredients. And so you're literally, if it's in-house, the ordering's happening in-house, you're ordering different ingredients from 15 different vendors. And then you're having to make sure it tracks, gets to the co-packer in time. Some of it's frozen, some of it's not. You have to make sure everything arrives on time for that one batching day and then a production day. And so you're balancing like a bunch of different people. So if one of the things that we did with our recipe developer to get the COGS down was like, hey, can you get the prices down and have it taste the same? But can you also actually like consolidate the vendors we're using? So can like 3 vendors actually, each source 5 ingredients instead of us working with 15 different ingredient vendors.
Which gets easier, I assume, as your batch sizes just grow. Then you can kind of go, hey, help me out a little bit here. But in the beginning...
when I was talking to the first person we were working with, they just gave us 15 I'm like, could you guys have maybe told us this is going to be really complicated? Maybe you don't do that. So we've learned a lot.
Well, so that's super interesting. If you're willing to share, I'd love to know the price on, I don't know what exactly, but that initial development and conceptualization, maybe even a range. Yeah. And I'm curious too, if you break that out on intentional cost versus unintentional cost. What I mean by that second category, a friend of mine who she developed a liqueur brand. I remember one of the first unexpected costs, and this is that second category, was the cork that she ordered from a vendor. She got samples, the one they actually used, and it got to the run. I guess she didn't have a way to check, was different than the one she had tested in a way that ruined. I think they still sold it, but it ruined essentially a large batch of alcohol for one of their first runs, which is a tremendous cost, obviously.
Yeah, it's expensive.
I think they did something very manual actually to fix that, which got crazy. So intentional cost to do something like this in the beginning, and unintentional cost to actually get it out the door.
I would say, just the formulation with them plus everything. That this formulation without the run, I would say was $10,000. Okay. So, I'd saved a little bit of money, but I bootstrapped the brand up until last June. So I eventually was I'm just going to really sign on to have this be my thing. I'm going to put all of my money into this. Hope this works out. And if it doesn't, I will chalk this up to business school. Yeah. It's the only thing I can keep telling myself if this all fails. Because now all this crazy stuff has happened in the retail, non-alc space where I'm okay, if this all goes to, excuse my language, business school. So yeah, I would say first co-packing, formulation, all of that, maybe let's say $20K.
Okay. That's actually less than I would have thought.
They were cheaper than who we're working with now.
Yeah, okay. That makes sense.
It's a lot more efficient over here where what we're doing now is a little bit better. But generally, I would say now, just to give you an idea of COGS, what is most expensive still for a brand like ours is cost of labor, the bottle, and the closure.
And the what?
Closure. The cap, the lid,
got it.
Cork.
Oh, interesting. That's a very specific thing.
It's glass, and we don't want to, we don't source anything outside of the U.S.
Is that a brand thing in terms of could it be much cheaper? To not be glass?
Sure. The more we order, obviously. The higher the order, the lower
I guess,
price.
actually, I don't want to get to this question yet, but I'll bookmark your calculus as a founder of brand and high-end, kind of ingredients, COGS, materials versus, cost efficiency.
This is a premium product, and we want to keep that integrity. Yeah. We also, when you order from a vendor outside of the U.S., it can get a little tricky. It's ocean freight, and then you don't really know if it's going to show up on time. We don't really actually, because we do such small runs. We do runs of 10,000 bottles and 36,000 cans. We're still trying to figure out the cadence and how often. Now that we're much bigger, we're selling more, we have larger accounts. We're now getting an idea of how often we're producing, and if we actually extend those runs, or if we keep them to 10,000 and we keep doing them more often, just from a shelf life standpoint. So we're trying to figure out strike that balance right now. Obviously, ordering more units of things at once gets the cost down, so we're exploring that. But generally, we're too, I guess, nervous right now to really dive into that yet. And so I think people also really appreciate when you source from the U.S. too. And
totally. Last question about this phase of the business before we move into kind of growing it from its origins. Locking in the flavor that first time, was that intuition? Did you do some sort of test that you got some data from? How did that work?
I had everyone try it. Yeah. I was just what do you think? Please be honest and tell me if you don't like it. Granted, not everyone is going to love it. So you kind of have to take a pause at one point and just be okay, am I going to wait until every single person likes it. Like we could all sit out at a restaurant right now and have the same meal and like not everyone's gonna like it. So you kind of have to just see, majority of who enjoyed it, see if you actually like it yourself, if you can speak to the product, and that maybe, those that eventually, want to be, the people that work with me like it. I want to make sure they like it if they're like actively working for this brand every day and pushing it to people. So yeah, you just got to make that call, but you definitely want as many people to try it. And especially from a branding standpoint, I think that you also want to see how people respond to the branding.
Right. So now let's get into moving from that formulation phase to locking things in and growing it. So let's first talk about branding. Again, I like your branding and website. It's really it's higher end, it's premium. It feels like it's kind of hitting a demographic. Talk about the formulation. Obviously, the name comes from the inspiration. What else goes into the inputs of the look, the feel of the brand today?
I mean, definitely just branding, like working with the right branding agency.
Oh, so you did work with a branding agency?
Yeah. That was something I was really adamant about just because...
You come from a marketing and brand background, right?
Yeah.
So interesting. So you go, I want to make sure there's a team that's working with me outside of the company on this. Talk about the decision there, because like someone who doesn't come from branding or marketing might go, oh, I want to do it myself. Should they?
No,
shouldn't they? Okay.
I was not going to do that myself. I'm not going to create a logo that is like going to become, a logo that's on the shelf for a while myself. Like I don't have any type of graphic design or art direction background. I just love marketing. I've done brand marketing for all of my career up until now. And so I certainly wanted to work with also an agency that understood beverage and that, also they had worked on another non-alcoholic brand that I thought did, looked really great. And we weren't close enough with them in competition. They're like a completely different brand, but really had followed them for a while and respected what they did. They work with a lot of mission-driven brands. They're female-founded. Female-founded wasn't really the main thing. Like if it was, founded by a guy, I don't think I would have said no, but I really liked them. And it was just, it felt like the thing to really invest in. And I still believe in that. Like a lot of brands have to rebrand. They don't do it right the first time and it's expensive to correct. So I really invested in that heavily. And I'm really glad we did because they basically came up with two different identities for us and we chose one.
Moving forward from that moment as a brand, does that become about, there's this interesting thing that happens, I think, with like beverage versus every other category. The people who initially like post on social media define a little bit of the brand, or where it first, gets placed and where people use it to define the brand a little bit. How intentional were you from there in terms of who the first customers were, where you got it put first inside a restaurant, a bar, whatever it might be? Like what's the moment for the go-to-market after the brand's locked in?
I mean, it was such a weird time because it was like the tail end of COVID. So our customer was whoever was willing to give us their money at that point and like who would shop us online as a beverage, which is still, I don't know if that's going to be our main market or our main channel of sales. I think that's always going to lean towards wholesale, retail. And we still had a pretty decent launch day. We made like maybe like $11,000, $12,000 online in our first day. And I'm not an influencer or like anyone that anyone really knows outside of my friends and family and people I went to college with. And, we're selling a $43 non-alcoholic spirit. It's not even really hitting like the big boom yet. So I didn't expect that big of a launch day online. And I would say we didn't hit any wholesale doors until maybe a month after. And it was Boisson and Spirited Away, which were non-alcoholic bottle shops. So those were all like low-hanging fruit for us. We're like, we know that like those stores are going to purchase our products because they also were thirsty for products like this.
Totally.
So if you look at those stores now, some of them are no longer with us, but like, the ones that are there, they're very cutthroat. People are applying to be in their stores. And I meet new founders now and they're like, can you introduce me to this person? I'm like, oh my God, these people were like DMing me like, please put your bottle at our shop. Like we need product on our shelves. Like we just need new upcoming beverages. So we were in all of those, like first and foremost. We also got into a ton of Foxtrots, which was like great. They're also no longer here, which is a bummer. But like, I would say a lot of stores that just understood CPG or like a pop-up grocer that really like were heroes to those types of products. And especially with non-alcoholic bottle shops, like they know how to sell it, right? They're passionate about it. Whoever's going into that store knows what they're going into that store to buy.
Which is somewhat, again, if we go back to one of my friends who's built this with core brand, like it seems like educating bartenders and educating restaurateurs is a key part of what she has to do so that they're good representatives of the brand when someone comes in and orders a product. Is that similar for you where you have to
100%.
make sure? Okay, so talk about that a little bit.
And that, I mean, that definitely is with bars and restaurants, 100% you want to make sure they know what they're serving, but even for stores, like, and demos, like I am constantly going to demo at stores myself because we still need to educate people in this space. I'm not selling a non-alcoholic wine or beer where it's as simple as saying, hey, it's wine or beer, but without alcohol. It's like, this is an aperitivo. It's similar to a Campari or Aperol. Like, there's just like so much work that goes into educating the consumer. And so that's what really moves product for us off the shelves is like having people go in and serve it and tell people about it. But for bars and restaurants, to answer your question, I often go in. If they're in New York, I go in person. I meet them. I sit down with them. I tell them about the product. They'll often ask how I serve it or how other restaurants and bars serve it. We usually say, it's simple. It could be mixed in with like sparkling water, tonic water, ginger beer, like meaning we can kind of do all the work at this product. Like you can just pour it in and just mix it with sparkling water, or you can make like a non-alcoholic Negroni. You can get crafty, and all different accounts serve it differently. So we're in tons of accounts, especially in New York because I'm here. I can't say that anyone repeats it. So that's kind of cool because for this product, you would think they would just hear me say that and be like, okay, cool, I'll just like mix it with water. They really take it back to their bar team. They often ask to keep a bottle and like experiment. And so people really care about it. And you can tell that these bartenders and the people behind the bar really want to make a premium craft mocktail. And I don't like the word mocktail, but drink without alcohol.
Is there a better term that's like catching any?
No. We're still waiting on that.
Hopefully drinks, this doesn't have to mean alcohol in the future. I feel like it does now.
Exactly,
Someone goes, let's go for drinks.
Yeah.
So many questions from that. But the first one is the moment where you're like, have to do so much of this customer education, the moment, I'm completely guessing here, that you decide to create the can of product? Like talk about that.
Less for like an on-prem, like bar and restaurant market. I would say that's more for the latter. So it's like, we just got into Whole Foods in New York City.
Congratulations.
We haven't really fully announced that yet, but
exclusive.
Yeah, but you can buy it now. First Nomad ordered, and now we're getting orders from other areas. But they really wanted cans first because I think it's a lower price point. It's a great entry point to what the bottle will taste like. But the bottle is still our top seller. And cans are really expensive to make. Like, it's still something where I'm like, maybe we don't keep the can out there. Maybe we eventually, if it doesn't make sense from a financial standpoint, take it away because people love the bottle. But again, I want to see it through with a larger retail relationship. I think that cans are able to be in a refrigerated section. They could be at like a sandwich shop, right? Or a bottle's not going to ever be in a bodega or a sandwich shop or like a smaller scale lower price style retail shop. So it's something we want to see through, but I would say it's easier for grab and go. It's just something you can have at a party and not have to mix it and bring mixers with you and make a whole thing on site. You can kind of just hand it to somebody or put it over ice and it's easy.
So it was inspired out of a retail suggestion or like, hey, we would.
Customers wanted it. They were just like, hey, when are you going to get into RTD? When are you going to come out with the spritz?
What's RTD stand for?
Ready to drink.
Got it. That's super interesting. So what was that portion, because you now are, kind of expert at beverage or more expert at beverage than you were, easier to develop the can initially?
Yeah, it was super easy. We just literally added sparkling water and extra lemon.
And then like finding the cans is expensive but easy.
I was like, I am not spending any more money to develop a can. I'm not spending any more money making some crazy new flavor using our formula because people already like the formula as is. Let's just make it easy. I actually had our co-packer formulate it for me. I was just like, as long as you can, run the nutrition facts and it still adds up and like everything is safe to drink and still tastes good, of course, and looks good and the color's good. And then we just basically hired we didn't even use our branding agency to design the can. We just already had a lot of brand identity, which when you work with a big branding agency, they'll send you like a whole deck, like this is your brand identity, stay within these lines. So we took that to like a smaller graphic designer and were able to like quickly design the can and the box, which saved us a ton of money.
So now, you've got 2 SKUs. You've got a product that's going to be in hopefully a lot of Whole Foods. Let's walk backwards slightly from a kind of finding these accounts originally and the sales perspective. Obviously, the first few are going to be you, and you're in person. Did you then hire a sales team? Do you work with the sales team? Do you today have kind of a lot of relationships that aren't you in the room? How does it work in terms of kind of the midway point from growth post just you to today?
So we're a team of 3, and that's me, 1 full-time employee, and a contractor who very much acts as a full-time employee. She's been with me from the start and is like very much a part of this brand. So we're a small team. Like, we are still very scrappy, and I think that we've taken a completely different approach from a lot of these other brands where it's like growth at all costs, raise a lot of VC money. Like, we bootstrap for a really long time. Even the investment that I have taken are all from angels or family, and they've been like smaller increments and smaller rounds to make sure that we just don't have to overraise and just to protect our valuation cap and to so to answer your question, like, we're still doing a lot of the work ourselves. Granted, the person that I did hire is head of sales and operations, so like she is speaking to all the distributors. She's speaking to a lot of these retail accounts. We'll have interns underneath us that will like be reaching out to accounts every day. So always, like, one thing that we did that I think was our superpower that I found that in talking to a lot of other founders didn't do, and I'm like, this is the easiest thing that we could have ever done and no one's doing it, is just reach out to accounts all day, every day and see who will take you. We can drop ship to your, like, we don't need a distributor to have this relationship. Like, I can just drop ship to you. You can carry our products. I don't have to give away that margin. Granted, sometimes they don't want to work directly with a store, but like most of them did. And that got us into 525 accounts without a distributor.
Right.
To be clear. And so that means you're meeting, restaurant people, and you're also meeting them directly. Like, they know you and they know your story, and so they like you.
More likely to push you.
I'm meeting bartenders, so when someone comes up to the bar and is like, what's the best mocktail on the list? They're gonna be like, oh, there's Figlia Spritz. So, that really was, I think, the thing that helped us get to where we are now, and just being humans and like going out and doing that work. And I can't say that was easy. Like, I was sending emails until like midnight every night before I hired someone to help me. But now that we have a distributor, we also, have them, which is a whole team. We work with a huge distributor here in New York. It's very highly regarded. So when you go into a store and you say that you're working with Union Beer, they're like, great, we already have a relationship with them. We'll just add you to our order. And then we have a boots on the ground. I would say they're kind of not necessarily like a broker, but they're like a team of about like 5 people that will go in and literally just try to get you into accounts. So they'll go into every Whole Foods. They have the relationships already that I don't have. I actually did go into all Whole Foods in New York in one day. I had my car, I would double park, and outside of every single Whole Foods, I went to like Wall Street, I went to Harlem, I went to Brooklyn, and I had just gotten leg surgery. I was like hobbling into all of them, and I was like, I'm looking for your specialty buyer, and they're like, what are you doing here? I do wear a sweatshirt, so I try to look a little legit, but it just became so much easier once we hired them, because they're like, yeah, we're going to go in every day. Like, we're going to check, and our team members have those relationships, and so now, that was like the second they were on, we got like 20 new accounts in the first week. So
it's a different, I feel like though it's still, the picture I have in my head is you with like a bag of like very loud bottles that you're driving behind you.
I'm always like, I have one of those like Hulken bags. Yeah. I have like all these different like backpack things, and I'm like a small girl, and I go in and they're like, are you the intern? Or like, what are you, like, who are you? Someone's like, kid. I'm like, oh my God, this is just so humbling, because it's like no one cares, and you just have to convince them to buy this like already kind of newish product on the market. And New York is just like not a glamorous place to do that. Like, I'm on the train, I'm not like Ubering everywhere. Like we can't afford that. So I'm like on the train everywhere I get there, and I'm like, I have to like sit outside and like be like fully like make sure I'm like ready to go in. And so yeah, you just learn a lot when you're doing it yourself. And a lot of other founders in the space like aren't doing that because they have a ton of money and they're hiring somebody else to do that. And so then no one gets to meet them.
Again, it's like that. You don't build, I keep using scar tissue, but it's not even the right word. You don't hear the stories. You don't hear the reactions. You don't get all the little data points of doing it yourself. You're not going to be able to, make some of the small, what might seem like small choices, but wind up being really impactful ones over time. So, by the way, you mentioned fundraising in that. So, you have raised a little bit of money. You mentioned from angels. You bootstrapped it for quite some time. Talk about the decision to not take money originally, the decision to take, some money. Do you consider yourself venture backed? Are you adjacent to kind of what's going on in D2C? What's all the things in the Figlia story about outside capital?
Yeah, I mean, I think because I had never done this before and this was a new category, I was very worried to take anyone else's money because I didn't want to let them down. And so, and also, and I've been very candid about this, like the money that I ended up using was money that my dad left me when he died. And so it's not like money that I found that to be something I wanted to just go and, it wasn't a lot, but like it was just something I wanted to use to honor him. And so it felt like the right way to use it. And I needed to at least gain the trust. So I didn't feel comfortable fundraising. I also had never done fundraising before. So I was like, I need to learn how to fundraise before I even fundraise. So, because that first impression is everything. And then someone's going to, a lot of what fundraising is like introductions. And then someone's not going to introduce you to somebody else if they think that you don't have your shit together. So
burn the match a little bit, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but also like being a founder who's not like coming from another, big tech company or hasn't done this a bunch of times before, like doesn't have the connections. And so I also had to like meet more people to even get to fundraise from the right people. So essentially, bootstrapped until last June and took an outside investment from an angel. And that was like a decent chunk. And this is an angel who I had met. He's kind of like a family friend / angel, but he is an investor in other CPG brands. So he's more of a strategic investor. And he, from the jump, like when I launched, he doesn't drink. He's like, I really respect what you're doing. I really respect your story. Like, I'll be ready to invest when you are. So you just let me know. And I was kind of pushing off taking investment for a while because I was like, if I can get to as far as I can with the money that I'm using, I want to do that. And so that's what we did and took that first outside investment from him, which was awesome. And we're raising now still. And we've raised, not even half of what we're supposed to raise, but we're still got some extra checks from friends and family and now working on getting in more strategic investors. So, but I still wanted to let friends and family in on this because obviously this is like a story that resonates with them too. We're family. And so they respect and understand and feel for the story as well. And so
that's awesome. I mean, from a, kind of who's involved so far and in what setting, it feels right in a lot of ways. Talk about, though, taking more money. What do you like about the potential future? What are you worried about that potential future? Because I think a lot of these brands have fallen out of favor over the past, kind of, let's call it year and a half-ish. Mm-hmm. It's also a super competitive space for acquisition.
Totally.
Competitive sometimes negatively. So, what is the more practical money, the less the either strategic or relationship-oriented money? What is that going to do to the business? And how do you think about it long-term?
I mean, I think when you take on a strategic investor, granted, I think you should always be vetting those people just as much as they're vetting you because you kind of don't want to let the wrong person into your ecosystem, especially once we've gotten this far on our own. We have a little bit more control over who we're letting in. So I would say the reason why I would prefer to have more strategic investors in now is that they're going to have a lot of relationships with other investors, or they're going to have relationships to, retailers, co-packers, or 3PLs. Like you can tell they've been doing it. They're a little bit more well-vetted in the space. And so they can kind of be that connection for you. Otherwise, they're just kind of a sounding board and they've done it before and you're like, great, I could use a little help, like in just hearing me out and giving advice and that sort of thing. That I'm not going to call my uncle up and be like, he's going to be like, what are you talking? I don't even know what any of this is. Like, no. So yeah, I mean, in that regard, you want to make sure you're still letting more of those people in, but we are not taking a growth at all cost mindset. We're prioritizing profitability, which I think in this climate, is refreshing to a lot of investors, especially angels, because we're not raising tons of money. And we're also not, going over our skis, which for me is I wouldn't feel comfortable doing that. I'm not the type of founder. It's not my comfort zone. I think if we ever started to, raise VC money and took it to that place, I would probably want somebody else involved that isn't just me handling that relationship, because I've seen so many brands just totally fall out because of it. And I just don't want that to happen to us.
Yeah. Well, this is fantastic. Thanks for this conversation.
Thank you for having me.